Alright, so I just saw Joker Foile a Deuce. I don't know if that's how you pronounce the name, and quite frankly, I don't care, you know what I'm talking about. Well, this is certainly an interesting movie, and it also has an interesting predecessor, because the first Joker seems to be a pretty mixed movie. I know a lot of people that really like it, but I know it's also gotten quite a bit of backlash for one reason or another, and personally, I really liked it. I thought it was a very well done movie. I thought it was interesting, it was dark, and it was disturbing, but in a very good way. Like, it really dives into the head of this disturbed character and how society often, neglects or abandons the mentally ill, and I thought it was a really interesting idea. I thought it was a very well done story. I thought it was really good. And now we have the sequel, which I saw the trailer for, and I thought looked pretty interesting. I mean, I knew the concept was definitely odd, to say the least. I didn't expect it would be a movie like that, but I was also open to the idea, because the more I thought about it, the more I was like, okay, that could be pretty cool. And now, the movie is finally here, and my thoughts on it are... honestly, I don't really know how to feel about this movie. Like, I genuinely can't remember the last time I felt this conflicted on a movie. There were some parts of this movie where I was like, okay, I'm digging it, and there were other parts where I'm like, yeah, you're starting to lose me, but then it started to bring me back, and then it kind of lost me again. Yeah, it's weird, and it's kind of hard to explain, but I'll try my best. So, the story picks up 2 years after the events of the first movie, which, in case you are unaware, the movie will remind you many times. This movie does talk quite a bit about what the first one did, but basically, it ends with Arthur Fleck, aka the Joker, going on a talk show where he shoots the host, and he also killed a few other people, so he's sent to Arkham Asylum, where he's imprisoned and hopefully rehabilitated. And at first, things start to be going fairly normal, you know, he talks with the guards, the other prisoners and stuff, he has to take his medication, and, you know, things are relatively unchanged. He gets checkups from, psychiatrists and stuff, but things start to get interesting when two things happen. One, he goes to, another division or whatever, where he sees a group of people singing in a choir, and one person in particular stands out to him, and that person is, of course, Harley Quinn. And the other thing is he begins talking with this lawyer who believes she can get him admitted to another mental hospital, or basically declared mentally ill, and therefore he won't be executed for his crimes, which the district attorney, Harvey Dent, yeah, we don't know Harvey Dent, wants to make sure he is executed for his murders, so she's trying to prevent that, but he's not really sure what approach he should take, because she's definitely telling him to do one thing, but Harley Quinn is telling him to do the other. Instead, Joker has very much become a symbol of, the common man and fighting against the system and stuff like that. So, and she's trying to convince him to more give into that rather than just going back to try and live a normal life. So first, let's start out with probably the strongest thing in the movie, and that's the acting. Obviously, Joaquin Phoenix won an Oscar for the last film, and I'd say he's pretty much just as good in this one as he was in the last one. He does an absolutely fantastic job, and Harley Quinn is played by Lady Gaga, which is very interesting, but apparently she's done some promising stuff in the past. There was a Star is Born remake that came out a few years ago. I didn't see that, but she was in it, and apparently she was really good, and yeah, she does a really solid job here. Now, I will say, she is not the type of Harley Quinn that most people are familiar with. She is not entirely accurate to the comics. She's very much more a different thing, but I think it works for what the type of story this is trying to tell, and I think it does a decent amount of job while also being at least semi-faithful to the comics in that she sees the Joker, she falls in love with him, and thus she decides to pursue him. Although, unlike the original comics and the cartoon and stuff where she originated, where Joker wasn't interested in her, she was just a henchman to him, here he actually does start to fall in love with her. And their chemistry is not the best, but I think that's kind of the point, because they are supposed to be a horrible, toxic, dysfunctional couple. They are deliberately written to be unhealthy for each other, because they are both mentally ill, they're both delusional, and thus they ultimately end up basically making each other worse off as they're together. And like I said, they don't have great chemistry, but I think that's the idea that they're going for. But while their performances are really good, the script is kind of a mixed bag. Remember how I said that the Joker has basically become a symbol? They they definitely take more of a tell, don't show approach with that, because they talk a lot of time about how people are chanting Joker's name. They're putting him on like signs and t-shirts and stuff everywhere. They're doing great, but we don't really see a lot of that. The majority of the movie is just focused on Arthur himself, either in the asylum or later on in the courthouse, which, yeah, I can go more into that later, but basically, we only really see a lot of that. We don't really see the common people and how they react to the situation and stuff, and I think it could have used a little more focus on that. As a whole, the story is actually kind of messy. It's kind of tough to explain, but there are a lot of moments that feel a little dragged out, and then there's a lot of other moments that feel pretty rushed. Like I said, the majority of the movie is just kind of talking about what happened in the last film, and it is mildly interesting trying to see, like, what is gonna happen with him and stuff like that, but again, I feel like it could have been a bit more interesting. They spend a bit too much time focused on, like, the legality of all that and, like, what it's done previously as opposed to actually showing it, and I think that could have been done a bit better. But there are definitely some really interesting ideas here. Like I said, the first one was definitely about how society neglects a mentally ill person. This one is definitely more about how they exploit it. Like I said, they talk about how they made a TV movie based on Arthur's story. We don't actually see any upping of the TV movie, but we do hear people talk about it, so clearly that's supposed to be like how there's a lot of like true crime stuff, and that's pretty interesting. The lawyer also seems, it's kind of morally gray, like we're not really sure whether or not she actually wants to help Arthur because it's the right thing to do, or if she just thinks it'll get more publicity and stuff. Harvey Dent, again, wants to make an example of him by executing him rather than and giving him a fair chance. So I think there are definitely some interesting ideas here, and also, like I said, Harley and Joker's relationship, that could be interesting, but a lot of them either aren't explored well or enough. It's kind of a weird thing. Like I said, the first one had really dark moments, and this one also does too, and again, they're handled pretty well. I do think some of the first ones were stronger, but there are definitely some moments where you feel very uncomfortable, and you are definitely meant to feel very uncomfortable, and I think it works well enough. Along with the acting, I think the strongest aspect of this movie is the score. The first one had a really good score, but this one also is at least on a similar level. Like, there are a lot of moments where you can feel like goosebumps creeping up, and the score definitely helps a lot with that. Another really impressive thing about it, though, is the style, and especially the shots. Like I said, most of the movie is seen either in the asylum or the courtroom, which is not a very interesting location, but with some of the things they do and some of the ways they, like, dive into Arthur's mind and stuff like that, it is done very effectively. Like, the moment that I really was like, okay, that looks really cool, is, if you've seen the trailer, you might have seen it where, like, Harley is visiting Joker, because, yeah, mild spoiler, she gets out of the asylum. I won't give away how, but basically, she takes her lipstick, she draws a smile on the glass, and he, like, matches that to look like the Joker smile, and, like, that is a really effective shot. I think that is really well done. And there's also some pretty cool little details, like the courtroom scene. Like I said, we do go detail with Arthur's trial and stuff, how as the trial goes on, and he begins to, like, listen to Harley and more, she slowly starts to sit closer and closer to him, which shows, like, more of the effect that she's having on them, and I think that's a really cool little touch. As a whole, the court scenes are probably some of the most effective in the movie. Like I said, there are some that are a lot of callbacks to what happened in the first movie, but there are definitely some really effective moments, because we interview the different characters and stuff, with the best one being, I forget his name, Gary, I think was his name, the short guy that he was friends with in the first movie, and he was one of his co-workers, but he's the one that he didn't kill because he was always nice to him, and, like, there's a really powerful scene where, like, he is called to the stands, and we see the impact he left on him, because despite letting him live, he was really screwed up by seeing him kill their other co-worker, and you can tell he legitimately did care about Arthur, and seeing that happen to him, it really affected him. It's done super well. But, of course, there's one big problem with this movie that's very hard to ignore, and it's the one thing I didn't mention earlier, is that this film is actually a musical. Yeah. It's a musical, and don't worry, this isn't like a Wonka thing where it wasn't advertised or whatever. I knew fully going in this was going to be a musical, and when I first heard that, I'd be like, okay, that's a really interesting idea. You know, if you're going to do a Joker sequel, why not do something completely unique? And the musical numbers in this movie don't really add much. I mean, it's very clear. Basically, if you saw the first movie and you know that scene where he's, like, dancing on the stairs and stuff, they are literally just extended versions of that. But while that was maybe, what, like 5 minutes or whatever, this is at least, like, a quarter, if not a third of the movie. There is a decent amount of song numbers in here. They are all pre-existing songs, I believe, even though I've never really heard them before, and they do not really add much to the overall scene. Like, some of them are honestly pretty cool. Like, they're well shot, the style and the cinematography and the sets and stuff are pretty decent, but again, they don't really add much to them. I mean, both Joaquin Phoenix and Lady Gaga are told or directed to like not sing great, because that's kind of the idea. And like at first it works, but as it goes on, it starts to kind of get old. And all of the songs are very repetitive, and they don't really add much. They don't contribute to the story. They kind of give us more insight into the characters and what they're thinking, but not a huge much. You could genuinely cut the song numbers out of this movie, and you would not miss much. In fact, that is by far my biggest problem with this movie. Is it is way too long. The first one was like 2 hours or so. This was like 2 hours and 20 minutes, and it really starts to add up, especially towards the end. On top of that, there are just some really weird things that happen. Like, there's a few plot twists they thrown in there with some of the characters and stuff, especially with Harley, and some of the stuff she's saying might not actually be true, and I feel like that's kind of an interesting idea. There are some things that are left ambiguous, whereas there are other things that are like fully confirmed and stuff, so you kind of aren't really sure what to believe her on, which I think is fine. But there's also some weird things that she does and Arthur does as the film goes on, especially towards the end, and I'm like, wait, what exactly are they doing here? Because I won't spoil what happened, but basically Arthur does something at the end that pretty much goes against what has been going on throughout the entire rest of the movie, and I'm not really sure how to feel about it, because I'm like, okay, are they trying to show that he has become more and more broken as the movie goes on, and thus he's finally given up everything, or are they trying to make us sympathize with him more? Because I honestly can't really tell. The first one was, he starts out very sympathetic, but you watch him slowly descend into madness, and this one, I feel like, is partially trying to bring him back, but it can't really tell whether or not it wants to fully commit to it or not. Like, it's really weird, and there are some strange choices that I don't know if I fully agree with, but I can kind of understand what they're going for. Like I said, it is weird. This is a very complicated movie, and I don't really know what my overall thoughts on it are, because there are some really strong, really great aspects of it, and then there are some things that just make no sense. There are some that could make sense, but are just really confusing. Like I said, I'm really all over the map on this movie. I know a lot of people have been, like, slamming it. It's not been getting great reviews, and I wanted to maybe give it a chance, but I really don't know where I can stand on here. I think it is a really mixed bag. Like I said, there's some really strong aspects. There's some good ideas in here, but I think it bit off a bit more than it could chew. It sometimes gets a little overwhelming, and overall, it just turned in a not awful, but not really good product either. Again, there's too much bad stuff for me to say it's good, but there's also too much good stuff in it for me to say it's bad, so I'm just gonna give it a middle of the road 5 out of 10.